Welcome back, MTG Joe here. Today we're doing another installment of the weekly meta breakdown where we look at the top performing decks on the MTG Arena ladder. This particular video is for standard best of 3. If you're looking for best of 1 or the other formats, check out the playlist. Try to get to each of them each week, depending on the data that's available. And speaking of data, where we get this data from is UntapGG. It's a companion tool that runs alongside your Arena client, tracks win rates, loss rates, whole bunch of cool deck functionality. Free to use a whole bunch of it. Link is in the video description, and I will paste these deck lists as well into the video description. So if you want to play them, you could just import it to Arena and get started. So we are going to be looking at December 5th through the 12th, 7-day span. Platinum to Mythic Rank, 21,000 matches were played in this time frame. So remember matches, so 2 to 3 games for best of 3, so 42 to 63,000 games of standard. And just jumping into it, the top performing deck of the week is Grixis midrange, but this is really Grixis Anvil, Grixis Sacrifice. So we've had Black-Red Sacrifice be a deck in Standard, Explorer, Historic. For a while, it's been Cat Oven into Ani Cult Anvil. So Ani Cult Anvil wants you to sack artifacts, or if an artifact left the battlefield for the turn, you get to create a colorless soldier token. So you're building around that. You're trying to use blood tokens from Voldaren and Aperture as well as Blood Tithe Harvester for value. And we got some new additions in the new set. So we have Transmogrant's Crown. So a big thing with this deck was you kind of ran out of cards. You don't have Deadly Dispute like you used to, Village Rites, stuff like that. So what you can do is you can equip the Crown every turn for a black mana, sack the token, you get to draw a card, get value, rinse, repeat, and recycle. You're pairing that as well with Saheeli Filigree Master, 4 mana Planeswalker. The plus lets you scry and draw a card. The -2 lets you create 2 colorless Thopter tokens that are artifacts as well, so fuels into the artifact strategy. And then its minus gives you an emblem that your artifacts cost 1 less to cast, as well as giving all your artifacts +1/1 power, which when you're creating an army of 1/1s that are artifacts, scales pretty well. Tying together the deck, you're playing a lot of the good black-red elements in terms of like Fable the Mirror Breaker, a bunch of good removal, Go for the Throat, Infernal Grasp, Cut Down, Voltage Surge, Shieldred on the top end as well. You also have a copy of Make Disappear in the main. In the sideboard, when we go over the sideboards here, we kind of just highlight what type of matchups they're for. The rest for kind of these black-red X mid-range decks, or like Esper mid-range, or like mid-range you control, not the creature heavier version with Rafine. Voltage Surge is some more removal. Brotherhood's End for like the soldiers matchups, more aggressive stuff. Counters for like the bigger mana decks. Graveyard Hate. Nixus is really good into these like these mid-rangey shells. They generally don't have a lot of clean answers for planeswalkers, and Nixus comes down and creates 2 copies. Also good against decks with a lot of counter spells because you naturally get 2 copies by sacking something. So it's harder for them to counter both copies. Soul Transfer for catch-all removal, and then more copies of Shieldred when it matters for either like a big blocker, life gain swing, stuff like that. We then go to Mardu Angels, 65%. So this is another mid-range shell. So you're going to see similar elements, the core like Fable the Mirror Breaker, Blood Tithe Harvester, stuff like that. But this one's got an Angel tribal sub-theme. So you have copies of Giada to ramp you up, Inspiring Overseer, Archangel of Wrath as removal, kind of kicked into there, as well as Sanctuary Warden. Giada is nice because it lets you still cast Archangel on turn 4 with the ramp, but you can have the 5th mana source to be able to kick at that turn there. Otherwise, you're just looking at the deck. You got some copies of Infernal Grasp, or sorry, Go for the Throat, Brotherhood's End for the aggressive decks, Wedding Announcement, Underdog to kind of get value out of your graveyard, an Emperor in there, some Shieldreds which are always present, and an AO to kind of fetch you your smaller stuff in the deck. Kind of going through the sideboard again. Hand Hate for the mid-range decks, Shieldred or enchantment removal. It's pretty much like destroy Shieldred. I guess it destroys AO and Rafine as well. Bankbuster for the grindy matchups, Unlicensed Source for Graveyard Hate, another sweeper option, catch-all removal, another Shieldred when it matters. Emperor's good as a nice flash threat. And then Gix's Command has a lot of utility. Removal for a small creature, gives something lifelink. You have a lot, you can make pretty big threats, like even an AO with lifelink or Sanctuary Warden is a pretty big threat. You also can return 2 creature cards on the grindier matchups. It's extra copies of Shieldred or any of your big threats, and then it can also be a good sacrifice effect for some of your opponent's bigger things. We then go to mono black aggro. So there's kind of a few different flavors of mono black. This one's a little bit lower on the curve, a little bit more creature dense. This one's at 60% win rate. So you still have your evolved sleepers, but you're adding in some copies of Misery Shadow, pumpable spell that exiles creatures when your opponent's creatures when they die. You have Razor Slash Transmogrant. So 2 mana 3/1 can't block, but against all these like multicolored decks, like it's pretty much 2 mana. Return it from the battlefield to your the graveyard to the battlefield with the 1/1 counter on it, so it becomes a 4/2. If we look at something like Grixis, actually this Grixis deck's pretty heavy on basics. The Mardu deck doesn't have any basics, and we'll kind of look at the other versions, but this could get fairly cheap to just be a recursive threat. Underdogs in there for card value. We see the Crown again in this deck for some card draw. Gix Yawgmoth Praetor as card draw, paired with all these smaller drops. Graveyard Trespasser for graveyard hate, life gain, and just a harder to kill threat. Copy Shieldred, Invoke Despairs for just kind of catch-all removal, card advantage, burn, just what doesn't Invoke Despair do, and then Phyrexian Fleshgorger. This card's interesting because it fits a couple spaces on the curve. Late game, it's a 7-drop. Early game, it is a 3-drop. That kind of helps you curve out as well, helps you swing the life gain. This version of the deck's also on full 4 Mishra's Foundry, just as creature land in the mana base. We then go to Grixis Midrange. So this is more of the kind of traditional Rakdos-y midrange, splash blue, giving you Corpse Appraiser for card advantage, some counter spells main. This deck's just like loaded with removal. Cut Down, Abrade is a good catch-all removal against artifacts as well. So against like a big Fleshgorger, Unlicensed Hearse, Bankbuster, anything like that can hit that as well. Also incidentally good against the Anvils. Go for the Throat, just good removal spell. Copy Liliana in the main. Fable's like the glue. Like you could play Fable and then 56 other random cards and you're like, this deck seems playable. Shieldred in there, and then like we see the Fleshgorger. Sometimes you'll see Blade Coil Serpents. I think Fleshgorger fits a nice part of this deck because it's really one of the few consistent life gain options. You have Shieldred, but it's contingent on you drawing cards, where the Fleshgorger can just stonewall a lot of decks. Is difficult to kill at times depending on the point of the game, or even if they take 7 life to kill it, then you can Invoke Despair. There's a lot of ways to kind of attack them that way. This version of the deck's on 4 Swamps for just as a count for the Transmogrant, Razor Slash. Sideboard, the other copies of Duress, Cut Down, Torch Breath for like blue things, just some removal, full Bankbuster package when you're going for the grind, Sweepers, Shieldreds, Graveyard Hates. You're pretty much always going to get some combination of these cards in these black-red mirrors. They're just utility across the board. We then have an appearance from Mono Red. So this is a 58% win rate Mono Red deck. So we have some copies of like Feldon in here that lets you get some card advantage if it's dealt damage. Full burn package, a Play with Fire and Lightning Strike, Swift Spear in here. Abrade, Rending Flame as removal. Then you got Reckless Impulse for card advantage as well. Bloodthirsty that can flash any of that back. Hatushi is a good evasive threat that goes over the top, as well as provides some card advantage or ramp. And then you have Jaya, which produces tokens, card advantage, can be pseudo removal. And then I guess you could technically, when you cast a red instant or sorcery, copy it twice. You got a good number of red instants in this deck. Also the full 4 of Mishras. In your sideboard, you got just a bunch of flexible burn spells. Flame Blast Bolt, Abrade, Obliterating Bolts, kind of scales with that. Your extra copies of Kill Shieldred, Chandra as a way to, against Farewell decks, against heavy removal decks, Chandra acts as a good element of card advantage and just pressure on your opponent. Grind value, so you can kind of just shift up into a bigger mono red mid-range deck. I guess this is kind of a sweeper against the smaller decks. Lets you create a dragon as well for a creature. We then go to the last deck, Azorius Soldiers. kind of fallen a bit. It was a little bit higher, I think, in past weeks. 53% win rate. We're seeing a lot more of the decks now just bring in Brotherhood's End. That cleans up a lot of the soldier decks pretty nicely. And really just kind of the configuration we're seeing differences of is whether they're on Myrel or not, or the 3-mana Mythic enchantment that gives +1/1. This version here is on the Myrels. You have Sky Strike Officer for card advantage and soldiers. Pump and kind of removal check lets you your killed non-token creatures come back as tokens, or just as the 1/1 token. Some removal in Brutal Cathar. Instead of Destroy Evil, it's going with Valor Stance. Lets you be more proactive in protecting your spells here while still being able to deal with like Shieldred. Valiant Veteran as a Lord, Thalia's Tax, Harbin is kind of an over the top. So we're not seeing the 2-mana flash create 2/1/1, or basically create a 1/1 soldier in addition. And then you have your 1-drops that are pretty staple in that. With this version here, we're also seeing a couple copies of Plaza of Heroes. You have the legendaries in Myrel, Thalia, and Harbin, and it could be in a pinch a way to protect your spells from removal, in addition to the Fortified Beachhead as a way to pump mana into your creatures getting a buff. Your sideboard, artifact enchantment removal, kind of graveyard, taxing, as well as a way to gain some life, and then kind of 2 creatures in 1. Heavy direct removal decks, Protect the Negotiators as general counter, some Gold Sentinels, Graveyard Hate, and then Wedding Announcement first. So if we look at a lot of the decks that are featuring just single point removal, Wedding Announcement does a good job of creating a lot of threats spread out over multiple bodies, as well as an Anthem effect in the mix. And then we also see the Wandering Emperor. Flexible removal lets you kind of attack on a different axis, doesn't get hit by Farewell. If we look at like kind of an example, Mono White and Pioneer, boards in 4 Wedding Announcements against like Rakdos and a lot of the heavy removal decks, because it's harder to interact when they're bringing a Fatal Push and you get 3 creatures out of something like this. So that's it for the week for Standard Best of 3. The new Explorer Anthology drops tomorrow. Or today, when you're watching this. If you're looking for some deck list ideas, I did a full video of that on my channel. You can check that out. We'll have to give it about a week or so to see the stats to accumulate, and we can see what's winning, what's not, if Nykthos is really going to be pushing mono green over the top, and what kind of comes out of that. But let me know what you're going to be playing in Explorer if you are, what you're playing in Standard, and as always, if you can, drop a like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for watching. Hope you have a great one, and stay safe out there.